We'll do some questions afterwards. If you'd like to ask questions, you may feel free to do so. My name is Chad Meadows, and I'm principal of Code Right Planners, and it's my pleasure to lead the consulting team that's working with your staff on a couple of things. We are helping the staff update the comprehensive plan here for the county. So Jake, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. We are also updating the development regulations. So your land use provisions, your subdivision rules, your zoning provisions in the parts of the county that have zoning are part of the adoption process or part of the project that we're working on now. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Jake to start us off, if you would, sir.
There we go. Ready to go. So Jake Petrosky, I work with Stewart, a planning and engineering firm that has offices in Columbia, Charlotte, and Raleigh. This is Carol Williamson. He's also with Stewart. We're leading the comprehensive plan, specifically the land use element and community facilities element of that comprehensive plan. County staff is doing a few other elements, housing and population. Talk a little bit about that, talk about some draft plan goals, and then Chad is going to talk about the land use development ordinance recommendations. So the comprehensive plan, the last comprehensive plan was updated in 2016. A lot has happened in Anderson County in the last 9 years. The county is required to update comprehensive plans every 10 years. So we're coming up on that 10-year update. That's why we're doing this. Also, if we're adjusting development regulations, it's required by state law that we update a few of those elements before those development regulations are updated, with the idea being that ordinances should be implementing a bigger plan. So that's what we're doing. Comprehensive plan, what is it? It's a long-range plan. It's looking at 10 or 20 years. There's things that can be done in the next year, in the next 2 or 3 years, in order to address big picture issues. We're thinking 10 or 20 years out. It provides guidance in terms of land uses, intensity, and design of new development. It also provides direction for staff and programs and infrastructure investment. It's collaborative. That's what we've been doing really over the last 4 or 5 months, is documenting a community conversation. I'll talk about some of the things that we've heard a little later. It is policy. It's not regulatory. It doesn't automatically update the ordinance or direct money in the budget or anything like that. It provides some guidance on if we're going to address some big issues that we've heard about, this is how we can do it. But it comes down to some subsequent decisions by your elected and appointed boards, and frankly, citizens have a role to advocate for implementing pieces of this plan. One of the big stories of Anderson County is growth. You all have grown significantly over the past 20 years. Since 2000, increase in population by 22%. We are projected to keep growing. This is from the state. They do population projections. It's expected this growth is going to continue. How we accommodate that growth is really what we're talking about. Where does it go? What does that growth look like? And how do we preserve some of the character and address some issues that have been coming up the last couple years. There's a lot of challenges when we talk about growth and development. Growth pressure is continuing. Development quality has come up as being an issue that people want to address. Infrastructure and services, and whether that's utilities, whether that's roadways and intersections, schools, public safety, all that is affected by new development. So that kind of falls under the land use element and community facilities element. There's a lot of concern over environmental impacts, from stormwater and sedimentation, mass grading, loss of forests and farms. And then we also are inheriting a set of processes and standards in the county that it has not been updated in quite a while in terms of what are the subdivision regulations. We've done some minor updates, some amendments over the years and even recently, but it's always important to think about that and how we can update that to better implement the plan. Community facilities element really is looking at county facilities, personnel, things like parks and recreation, things like public safety, utilities, solid waste, airport, roads and bridges, and administration. As you've seen that growth in population of 23%, that comes with implications in terms of firemen, in terms of folks that are needed for roads and bridges, in terms of utility demand. All that stuff has implications. So I mentioned this process is largely about community conversation. We've had a lot of stakeholder meetings, public meetings, including the one tonight. We've also had a survey, almost 700 responses, and I'll hit some of the highlights of what we heard as part of that outreach. We asked, what are the top 3 challenges facing Anderson County moving forward? And the top responses were, number 1, management of residential growth, 2, traffic and infrastructure capacity, and 3, loss of farmland and rural character. So those are some things that we need to prioritize in terms of addressing moving forward. We asked about land uses. What should we be encouraging or discouraging? And folks said they really want to encourage reuse of existing buildings and sites, agriculture and forestry, recreation, and small-scale commercial. Those are the ones that people really wanted us to encourage more in more places. And then folks said that they would like to discourage residential subdivisions and mining activity. So they were less enthused about encouraging those. And so that means we probably need to look at standards for those and processes. How do you feel about growth and development in Anderson County? People could say, hey, it's growing at the right pace, or encourage more residential growth. A lot of people said growth should be slowed and managed more effectively, and then growth should be more targeted. Those were the big takeaways there. And then we asked, well, which growth management measures would you support? And number 1 was restricting the scale or density of new residential growth, increasing standards to control the design and character of new development, and then number 3, additional restrictions to high impact land uses, and that could be mining or solar farms or industrial development, that sort of thing. So those are the top 3 there, so that gives us a little bit of direction in terms of what we should recommend in the plan and what might end up making it into updates to the development regulations. I mentioned this growth is likely to continue. Well, there's different ways to accommodate residential growth. It doesn't have to all look the same, and each style of development has different impacts. We asked about different types of neighborhood design as part of the survey. Folks were less enthused of conventional subdivisions where it's mostly lots and very little open space. People were more supportive of conservation subdivisions or large lot subdivisions or farmhouse clusters, which are basically low density conservation subdivisions. There's some graphics here. We can come back to this and talk more about that. But right now, we have a lot of our regulations really support this conventional subdivision type, and we don't have a lot of requirements or options really that get to the conservation design of farmhouse clusters. You also have some large lot subdivisions, like your recent changes of minimum lot size and without well and septic kind of creates these large lot subdivisions. So you do have some of that, but these other 2 are not generally an option. For new neighborhoods, what qualities do you think are most important? This residents favor preservation of natural areas. So this is preserving open space as part of new development. That is a big one, and then limiting overall density and mitigation of traffic and limiting mass grading. And again, you're doing some of this in your ordinance, but we can always tune up some pieces of this in order to better address these concerns and priorities. As Anderson grows, we asked what services should the county invest in. Number 1 was county road maintenance. And I know you all have a referendum on some additional funding there. We'll see where that goes. Public safety facilities was number 2. Parks and recreation was number 3. You all have really led the way in parks and recreation in the county over the last 15 years. There's a lot that you all have done, and more we can build on in the future. So we heard a lot of that stuff, and the first part of our recommendations are goals. What should we be working towards for the land use element and the community facilities element? And then there's going to be a number of recommendations under each goal. These are some draft goals. We really want to get your feedback on them. see if these are in line with kind of what you think should be goals, or whether we should reword them or address something that's not addressed. Number one is improve growth management in unincorporated Anderson County. And again, there's gonna be a lot of tools and ways we can do that. Goal 2, protect natural resources, agriculture, and rural character. Goal 3, update standards and processes to mitigate impacts of new development. And then 4 is promote a balanced mix of land uses that support tax base and quality jobs. And that's one thing that you all have been really successful at over the last 5 or 10 years, is recruiting new businesses to come to the county. And if you go to the Economic Development Board, you can see that you all have been really successful in increasing jobs in certain sectors of the economy. The reason why that's important is Anderson County does have a relatively low average income compared to a lot of surrounding counties. So we need good jobs here. By the way, it also helps your personal bottom line, because if we have some commercial development, industrial development, it adds to the tax base and typically keeps residential taxes low. So that's something that's an added benefit of that. Community facilities goals: providing adequate or quality active and passive recreation opportunities, prioritizing water and sewer system upgrades that support economic development land use goals, and then ensuring adequate public safety and community services for all citizens. And that's fire and EMS, that's schools, those sorts of things. As we get into recommendations for land uses, one of the things that we did as part of this is get folks feedback on what they want to see and where. But then also we did a land use suitability analysis that looks at economic and environmental inputs on what makes different land uses really want to go in different places. So we looked at residential suitability, which is this map. The green is kind of areas where residential really wants to go based on infrastructure or other economic factors. And then commercial and agricultural and industrial. And that was one input along with other feedback, past plans, and input on what land uses we're recommending in the future. So happy to talk more about this. And this is a draft future land use map. This is really meant to be a guide for land use decisions and infrastructure investment decisions over time. If there's a rezoning, then the Planning Commission and County Council are meant to look at this map, and is this in line with the land use map or not? And that should influence the design of the subdivision, whether something's approved or whether something is approved with conditions. And that's really how it's meant to be used. So it's a really big part of that land use element. We have a larger format map over there on the table, and then we also have a board with all the different descriptions of the character areas. Each color kind of represents an area where certain land uses are encouraged and certain design or density is encouraged or discouraged. A couple of highlights here: agricultural areas, the dark green really show where concentrations of intact farmland and forestry operations are, and that could remain viable long term. New residential character areas have been added. We don't just have agricultural and a residential. We have rural residential, which is more lower density, or very low density, which is kind of 1 to 2 runs per acre, medium density, it's 1 to 4, and then commercial mixed-use areas and rural village centers for commercial development of different kinds, and then also industrial employment areas that are key to kind of that tax base. So we really want to get your feedback on your area of the county or neighborhood and what you see is appropriate in that area. And this is just a picture of all the different land use categories, but again, there's a lot more information over there on the board that we'd like to get your feedback on. A couple other major recommendations. We're going to have a number of recommendations on the land use element and the community facilities element. It's really about how you implement some of these goals. So it's not just enough to have these lofty goals that sound good, but what are some steps that can be taken by the county council, the planning department, the planning commission, and all our partners in order to address some of these concerns. One is consider adopting rural or low density subdivision regulations or zoning that encourage higher density growth in certain areas, require adequate standards and improvements concurrent with development. So that's open space preservation, that could be transportation improvements. Consider changes to review and approval process for development and or zoning. Parks planning is something that we're going to be leading into, so parks and trails, and building on some initiatives that have already been done. Strategically planning for sewer service, that's one way to restrict or guide growth, and then addressing public safety needs in certain areas of the county. So, again, this is just a sample of some of the things we're going to be talking about in the land use element and community facilities element. We will likely have draft versions of those plan elements next month for review. And I'm going to turn it over to Chad.
Thank you, Jake. Okay, so I'm Chad. My firm is CodeWrite, and we draft development codes for local governments. And that's what we do. And Karen Mallow is with me tonight. So thank you guys for coming. Okay, so lots of growth, right, in Anderson County recently, right? We need to consider updating it. So that's happening. Staff is doing 8 chapters. The consulting team is doing 2 chapters, okay? The comprehensive plan is our guide for the future. How do we want to be configured in 10 years? How do we want to accommodate the growth and development that's going to come here? That's what the comprehensive plan does. What I do, what Karen does, what your land development regulations do, is implement the policy guidance that's in your comprehensive plan. Okay, so that's why we have this. This document is intended to render the future that the plan says it's looking for. The land use and development ordinance is a consolidation of your current regulations. You guys have rules on the books today for land development, okay? Whether you live in a zoned portion of the county or you don't, there are still rules that apply to you, okay? Chapter 24 of the County Code of Ordinances sets out the land use standards, and those apply to you wherever you are in the county, zoning or otherwise. Chapter 48 sets out the zoning rules, okay? If you're one of the 25% or so of the land area in a voting precinct that's got zoning, then you also have zoning standards that apply to your use. And these regulations together control what uses can go where and how they need to be configured to go on the land, and then ultimately how they're operated, so that you don't create nuisances for your neighbors and you have a safe situation, etc. So we, Karen and I, and others who work with us are charged with developing regulations based on the work that the county and Stewart are doing. And this schedule wheel shows the 10 tasks that we have to do. And so this follows a set process. We put together what we call a code diagnosis, a blueprint for what the new regulations look like. From there, we make an annotated outline. It gives you a dress rehearsal of what the new document is going to be. From there, we go into drafting. We write the document twice, not once, but twice. Each time we write it, we come to town. We spend time in talking with the planning commission, talking with the elected officials, talking with people who live here. What works, what doesn't, we like to change this, fix that, etc. The point is, we have a lot of discussion, a lot of iterative talk and input from folks. When all of that is done, we test the rules. Okay, so before we suggest they be adopted, we test them. We test them with the development community and anybody else who'd like to be involved with us in that process. We almost always adjust the regulations after testing because we find things that didn't work like they thought they would. Okay, that's not uncommon. These documents are long, they're complicated, and sometimes it's easy to miss something, so that's why we test. After testing is done, we'll move into the adoption process. That's set for us by state law. Planning Commission hears the proposed text amendments. Elected officials will hear and then ultimately decide those. When all of that's done, we'll deliver this material. Now, we are doing also, in addition to the text, we're also doing a zoning map for the portions of the county that have zoning. Okay, so those are the 2 things that we are working on. Right now, we are in task 3, the diagnosis, all right, the blueprint for what the new land use and development ordinance will look like. Here are some of the things that we are trying to accomplish in this process. More coherent strategy for managing growth, right? We've heard from folks that there's a lot of development pressure and we need a better set of tools to deal with it. Having more predictable development outcomes for everybody, okay? For the developer, yeah. For the people who live next door, yeah. For the elected officials, yeah. For staff, for everybody. One of the things that's been consistently stated to us from everybody we've talked to is the need to protect the agricultural and rural character of this community. That is very important, as we understand it, for the people who live here. And we are taking that to heart and developing development regulations that are going to help you do that. Higher quality development, right? Feels like a wave has washed over the county in the last decade or so, right? And we're getting a lot of development. And what we're hearing from people is we're not pleased with what's coming to town. It doesn't feel that great. It doesn't feel like what we deserve or what we should have. And that we'd like to see higher quality development. If we're going to have it here in Anderson County, let's have it be as high quality as possible. So we're talking about development standards that'll help encourage or require higher quality development. When it does come here, it needs to be better. Okay? We want to support property values. The people who've bought land in the county have investment back expectations. They want to be able to make money ultimately from selling that land. All right? So we want to support those investment back expectations and be sure that people, are able to realize their dreams when they've invested in property here. And I'm not talking about the developers. I'm talking about all of y'all who live here and bought a house here, just like me where I live, right? I want to sell my house for more than I paid for it. That's pretty typical, right? How do we make sure that happens? Better tools for managing traffic and stormwater. Traffic, stormwater seem to be real big concerns for most of the people that we've talked to. If this list doesn't seem right to you tonight, if there's stuff on here that needs to be added, please come over to the table and tell us, and we're happy to add that into what we're working on, okay? If there's something here that is wrong or needs to be amended, let us know. I want to be sure to hit this point. We are not here to sell zoning. There are some folks in the community who don't want zoning, and that's fine, absolutely fine. One thing I do want to be sure that everybody understands is that today, right now, Chapter 24 applies to all unincorporated land in Anderson County. My friends, you have development rules that you are subject to today. Landscaping rules, signage rules, access rules, setbacks, heights, even standards for some uses apply to you in the county, whether you're in a zoned portion or not. Some of those regulations will be adjusted as part of this process. So this does affect everybody. This is not just something for people who live where there's zoning. This will impact everybody in the county. Here are some of the key issues that we're thinking about addressing or trying to address through this project. And I'm not going to go through these in great detail. There's a board over there that details all of this information, and it's there for you. And I'll tell you more about how to see more information about this in a minute. We want to implement the plan that the county and that Stewart are working on. All right, what are those policy guidance pieces? Concurrency, level of service standards for roads, possibly schools. Seems like something that's very important to people. Being more user-friendly with our code. Picking up our code and understanding it. How many of the folks in this room have looked at the development code for Anderson County? 1, 2, 3. Okay. You've looked at it. Was it easy to understand? Nope. That's not uncommon. And making that easier to follow so that people who aren't, people who aren't professionals can understand what's in the book and what it means. More procedural clarity so that you can look at it and I can look at it and we can agree on what it says. That's not the case right now, believe it or not. For everybody who looks at it, they have a different opinion about how the process works. So we want to perfect current practice. We want to have some of the best practices here that make sure that procedural clarity is not that's not a luxury; it's a necessity. I mentioned community character already and how important that is. Protecting farms, protecting forests, protecting environmentally sensitive areas, stopping this mass grading business, starting to have some better tree protection, dealing with sedimentation and erosion. All of those things are part of what we're working on. Modernizing your districts and your uses. Your current regulations, while it's true that they have been amended over time, they were originally drafted in 2001, they're 24 years old. new uses that have been developed in the last 24 years, okay? Data centers, cryptocurrency mining operations, event venues, short-term rentals, just to name a few. And there's many, many, many more. You don't have a lot of regulations on those uses in your current book, and we need to address that. Raising the bar for development quality. Remember, we're getting all of this growth. If we're gonna have growth, gosh darn it, let's make it good. Let's make it as good as we can get, right? So, adding some more street connectivity standards so that our street networks aren't so crowded. New single-family residential design standards. So when we do see a new residential subdivision, it's not cookie-cutter houses made out of cardboard. Okay? New design standards for multifamily commercial uses, updating your sign regulations, landscaping, etc. Creating some incentives for preferred development forms. What's preferred development? Well, we're not sure. We're going to talk to you guys and try to come to agreement on what are the kinds of things that we'd like to see in Anderson County. Workforce housing, places for police officers, teachers, nurses, planners to live who don't make 6 figures a year. And who would like to be able to live here, and who you'd like to live here so that you have services. More tree retention, maybe more mixed-use development, etc. Handful of other things. Finally, legal sufficiency. We are here to try to keep the county out of court. That has not gone so well in the recent past, and we'd like to fix that. So addressing legal sufficiency and making sure that we are in accordance with all the applicable laws and that the county is in a legally defensible position, right? If we're going to have all of these new standards and have these new expectations for quality, we want to be sure that that's defensible, okay? So these are our key issues, the kinds of things that we are attempting to bring you in your new regulation. Jake and I, certainly I will, and Karen will be with you guys on this project for at least the next 14 months, at least. Over that time, we will be putting information on this website. This is the project website. The mobile version is not up right now, so if you go there on your cell phone, you're going to be sadly disappointed. Tomorrow, the mobile version will be operational. But if you go there on your laptop, you'll see this. There's information on this website about the project, how to participate, all of the draft work product that's been put together so far, and all of the draft product that will be prepared in the coming days and weeks. A place for you to sign up for email updates, a place for you to ask a question or make a comment, and a variety of other things. So really, really encourage you to go to this site and share it with the folks that you know, so that people have this information. And with that, I think Jake and I are going to take any questions. So I'm going to go sit down, and if anybody has any questions, please feel free. Please.
Well, kind of concerned, do you have anything in your plan that's going to address where county line meets municipalities? Do you see any way to get better integration and common sense in that area?
So, the question that you're asking is, how do we do a better job planning and regulating in the edge areas where the unincorporated county comes up against municipal boundary like Anderson or Pendleton or Belton, whatever. Is that the question?
And throw in the issue of annexation.
With respect to annexation. So annexation is something that we don't have any control over, and municipal incorporations like Anderson and some of the other towns here in the county have the ability to annex property, and the county cannot stop them from doing so.
You see it as a frustration?
It can be a frustration. It can also be a good thing too.
Agreed.
It just really depends on the situation. In some cases, it's appropriate for whatever being proposed to be annexed, because the county should not be in the job of having urban style growth in a county, because that leads to all kinds of problems. The county does not have a local police department. They have sheriff, but they cover a lot bigger area, and so happen is some level of coordination if there's some bigger picture goals that city is trying to accomplish or the county is trying to accomplish long term in those areas.
How you gonna keep the rural character if you don't keep the rural?
That's tough. That's
That's
tough.
a great question.
And I think that's where it comes down to, coordinating utility planning. If there's areas that we want to keep rural and agricultural, we probably don't need to put a school there. We probably don't need to put a sewer trunk line down that stream basin, because that is not the way that you're going to keep something rural or agricultural.
Controlling the density,
Or
controlling the density in the areas that we like to keep rural, limiting the range of allowable uses in the places that we like to keep rural. But that comes, that's a double-edged sword too, right? Because the people who own that property, maybe I own 100 acres out in a rural area, and I'd really like to, pass that land on to my heirs, or pass that inheritance on to my heirs from selling that land. But if somebody like me has come in and written standards that suppress the development potential of that land, the ability to sell that land in the future for a profit is affected. And so we just have to keep in mind that that's always a double-edged sword. We understand the county wants to keep certain parts rural. I know that Jake's plan is going to identify and does identify some areas where rural is appropriate, and we expect to write some standards to help do that. All that to say, we still have the market here. People can still buy property, and people can still propose to develop that property. And, we have to work within that framework. That's part of this.
I'd like to know more about, like, specifically what Ed you're talking about. So if we could kind of go over there, you show me a little bit more. I'd love to know more about that area.
Just going back, what is it, what you're proposing that might stop the idiocy of the east-west connector going city? What would you propose that would avert that?
You're talking about the east-west connector in particular? Yeah, that area around there. What we can do is we can have that area that's in the county jurisdiction, and we can have a land use recommendations for that area. And that would apply if development happens in the county jurisdiction. Now, if it annexes, then there's nothing we can do.
Well, if you can't do anything, why isn't somebody setting the flag up the pole and telling the state that it's not a proper land use system if we can't avert situations like that?
That's a tough one.
And that same property is in the 10-year plan for the city to annex it.
Right, yeah.
So we've gone to our state delegation, and Blake Sanders is the only one that's really stepped up and works in that lane of business and is trying to make some changes. But
Yeah.
it's supposed to be kind of an open area, trail system, all that beautifulness preserved.
Yeah.
They want to create Verde, which is over in Greenville. They want to create like a Verde with commercial businesses all
Yeah.
through there, and so we're overlapping two different uses for that, and they've got all the rights. We don't have any. As long as they can get close to it, it's theirs. So.
Right. It's a challenge. Short of going to your legislature and changing the rules about what powers cities have to annex land, there's not much that we can do.
There's coordination that needs to happen, really,
that's true.
between, county council and county citizens and the city. Ideally, there would be a set of shared goals that you have for that area. It might be slightly different how it happens based on, the city regulations versus county regulations, but you're still trying to accomplish some of those shared goals, with style development, because you can, I think there's always common ground. And if they, want to annex it and add tax base and have some style of development, maybe they can do certain things from a design perspective that still replicate some of the goals that the county has for that area.
The problem we have is the city's not going to listen to anybody that lives in the county because they can't vote for it. So they won't even let them speak at a city council meeting.
Yeah.
So that's, there's not going to be, we're trying, but there's not going to be, they're kind of showing that.
I think the practical action, I'd like to talk more about that area, and we can include some recommendations for what we'd like to see, what the county would like to see in that area and see where that goes.
What I would like to see is a group of county delegates and some of the general public to get together and form a committee going to the state to promote better rules and regulations about annexation.
I agree, I mean, I'm
I mean,
100%.
it has to go to the state.
And we had a meeting, the county and state delegation had a meeting a couple weeks ago, and it just, we brought up this exact conversation, like, the people that neighbor the property cannot go to the city council meeting because they don't vote, and it's this awkward situation where the city has to grow to keep the budget going and add more property, and the county has no rights, and it would be a drastic change to.
But in other states, that's not the case.
Well, another state
And
that has
that's what we need.
territorial jurisdiction or a sphere of influence or something like that, where folks in the county can still weigh in on, you know, stuff that's happening
Exactly,
in
and that-
future areas of the city. So, I mean, there's a structure there that you
Yes.
can point to that is a slightly more elegant version of what you got here, but, yeah, that would have to happen at the state level. Yeah.
If they had to keep the zoning that was in place for a period of time, that would help. I think that would discourage, if you had to hold it for 3 years and however we have it set, that might discourage an investor from buying and having to wait for that moment. But I don't get the feeling anybody's in our corner on this thing. I really
It's still a
don't.
Band-Aid.
Yeah, it is a Band-Aid. It's not a fix.
Is there any precedence for any city, or county where they work together? Like within the state of South Carolina, do we have any models that we could?
Yeah, I mean, there's examples of joint city and county planning, that, you know, for instance, like along corridors, say this is what we wanna see regardless of whether it's annexed or not, and then working towards that. There's also, you know, going back to utility planning, in some cases, counties and cities have established utility service areas that, you know, municipal services will not be extended beyond certain areas, or if they do, there's an approval process so that it can be amended, and that is something that typically is a joint county and city thing, because, you know, they both have utilities, and they both, you know, but it doesn't work if only one party is party to that agreement. That, you know, if we have a utility service area and it's only county utilities that are restricted, well, that doesn't really affect anything, because then the city can just serve, right? So that's why it has to be kind of a joint, approach there. And you have some private providers too that would need to be involved in something like that as well.
Right, for the interlocal agreement to work, everybody needs to bring something to the table. Everybody needs something, and everybody needs to have something to offer. And then you agree, and then the interlocal is in place. And if you don't have much to offer, or you don't have any needs, then no interlocal is not gonna be a success.
Concerning annexation, who would you say profits the most from that? The cities that are annexing or the developers that are being annexed? Because that's kind of a gotcha question. I mean, do the developers, I understand they might want fire service for insurance purposes, but do the citizens that are buying that want to pay for that and have that extra layer of taxation added on to their tax bills? Or is it just to get sewer that the municipality might not, sewer and water that they might not otherwise want to provide? Or do the municipalities want it just so they can bring in the tax dollars?
So, you know, I mean, I think one of the things that Jake alluded to earlier on a separate question was this issue about how there is a role for annexation, right? And that role is to be locations where growth is appropriate, where development is appropriate. If we're gonna grow, let's grow in the cities, because that's efficient to serve, it's less expensive for us to run infrastructure there, it creates a critical mass that allows, you know, non-residential development to come forward and be profitable. A lot of counties actually affirmatively send growth to cities. They adopt policies that say, we don't want to encourage high density development. we think that should go to cities, and we recognize that in order for cities to take that growth, they're gonna have to annex land to be able to accommodate the development as it comes in. So, you know, the question is a philosophical one. Does extra growth in Anderson County, is that good for everybody, even the unincorporated county? And you know, the answer to that question depends on how you feel about it. If extra growth brings more non-residential options, more employment options, more cultural options to the community, and the way to accommodate that is through growth in the cities, does the incorporated county benefit from that? You could make that argument that it does. So, you know, it's a nuanced kind of a question. Do the cities profit from annexation? Well, sure, they get bigger, they get more ad valorem. Yeah, absolutely. I
And
guess
they have to provide more services.
yes, they
for the
do,
county.
which costs money, right? So it's not just a one-way money thing. You know, and then what benefit does that growth inside the city bring to the unincorporated county resident? That seems to be the relevant question. And you know, I don't know if you have any other perspective about it, but certainly, you know, more commercial opportunities, more cultural opportunities, higher property values accruing to unincorporated county residents is one of the benefits from that growth. And frankly, you don't get Powdersville, where it's unincorporated and we don't have the infrastructure to serve the development. And we have all of these problems with this urban kind of development that counties just aren't well suited to handle.
We may got an easier question.
So this is a 10-year plan, correct? You guys are required to update it every 10 years?
Yeah, you're supposed to do minor updates 5 years and then major update 10 years. This would be a major update.
Okay, which, so you could do it sooner, I guess that was my question. Is
Yeah,
it can be reviewed.
5 years it should be updated. So that would be, you know, 2030 seems like such a long future, but it's not. It's gonna be here sooner or later.
We are suggesting also, and we've alluded to it with Planning Commission during some discussions with them, we'd like to see the county get into the practice of more regular audit of its development rules. Maybe every year, maybe every other year, some kind of increment where we're going back and looking back at the rules. Are they working? And doing that on a more regular basis is a best practice that we would encourage. So not just the plan, but also the development rules.
I have a question. Has there been any consideration in this process of revitalizing some of the pretty old rundown neighborhoods?
Yeah, actually, like one of the things that we heard, we asked about development preference, and the number one development preference was reusing and revitalization, you know, existing sites or underutilized areas, and you have a lot of them, not just in the cities and towns, but in the county as well. And that's from, you know, vacant lots in Piedmont Mill Village, or on some of your major roadway corridors, where you have a commercial lot. It used to be a business 10 years ago, and now there's a building that's half fallen down in the parking lot. You know, you have a lot of that. So it's something that, from a policy perspective, there can be some things that we can do to encourage reuse of those sites, and it's something that's a really big opportunity. That's one of the reasons why, you know, we don't have a lot of new commercial areas everywhere across the county, because we need to utilize what we have. You know, we're going to need some new commercial areas, but we also need to reuse what we have.
And it's necessary for us to recognize that, first off, I think everybody agrees that it does make sense to be more efficient and more judicious and reuse sites that maybe are derelict or aren't used anymore. And that's a positive for everybody. At the same time, we also have to recognize that there can sometimes be problems on those sites, right? Depending on what activity took place there, that land might be contaminated. There might be some kind of cloud on the title. There could be some issues that greenfield sites don't have to deal with. don't have to cope with. And we have to recognize that sometimes. And sometimes we write regulations that favor redevelopment of existing sites over establishment of greenfield sites. And if you think that that's a good idea, I would encourage you to take that Sharpie right there and write that on that sticky note and put it on the sign over there so that we can take a picture of that and send that to the elected officials, so that they know that that's something that people would like to see more of. That we would soften regulations for people who were voluntarily taking on the extra effort of, redeveloping sites.
Early on in your presentation, when you were talking about the different types of developments, conservation and single family, there was one at the bottom that it said farm communities or something.
Farmhouse cluster.
Yes, could you
So,
give a little?
so,
Because that's never been anything discussed or presented in this area, period.
So a conventional style suburban development is just you lot it out and there's very little open space and that's the yield and very little open space. That's the main focus of that development. A conservation style subdivision or conservation subdivision, it preserves a larger amount of open space, typically about 40%.
I don't know about that, I just wondered what you were considering.
Yeah, I'm getting to it. I'm building it. It's a dildo.
He's telling the story.
So a conservation subdivision, typically smaller lots and more open space, but typically about the same number of lots as conventional subdivision. But that typically requires water and sewer in order to get real small lots and that sort of thing. And then, so those are two different subdivision design types for water and sewer, areas with water and sewer. Then you have large lot residential development that can work on, just well and septic. And you all have some of that in the county. 1 acre lots. Think about that. The problem with that 1 acre lot subdivision, and you see this, outside of growing areas, from Charlotte to DC to Atlanta, whatever. Large lots do not protect land. They don't protect farmland. They don't protect natural resources. They just eat up more land. Even if you have 2 acre lots, all that's going to do is just eat up more land. A farmhouse cluster is basically a low-density conservation subdivision that could be built on well and septic, but clusters development away from natural resources or existing agricultural operations, so you can have, the same number of lots or maybe a little less than even a large lot subdivision and still protect some of that open space and some of the rural character, because large lot subdivisions generally don't protect rural character. All they do is eat up more land and slightly less density, which is better in some places, but it's not really protecting rural character. So that farmhouse cluster, you see some options in development codes across the country. If we want to preserve land and preserve open space, but we might not have water and sewer everywhere, so that's an option.
Conservation subdivision light, with the word farm in front of it.
And typically, the way that we would write those is we would actually have less yield than even a large lot subdivision, but easier to permit, easier to build, because we want that style to, it's better for a lot of reasons than a large lot. So it might be an easier approval process. It might be considered a minor subdivision. And if you meet standards, then you don't have to, wait as long and jump through as many hoops, But it's less impact. It's less impact on the roads. It's less impact on, other things. You might have a different street cross section, a street standard for that sort of thing, because it's really a small scale thing. But anyway, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. But generally, you would support that where you're wanting to preserve agricultural and rural character
Without water.
Yeah.
Have you identified any biotic corridors? For instance, transmigration of certain species throughout the county that could be earmarked for preservation for the future land use?
There are some statewide landscape corridor data sets that need to be factored in. We have not done a conservation suitability analysis. We did look at agricultural suitability. but that's something that we can certainly do when it comes to open space recommendations. And when we talk about preservation of open space, we want to consider landscape connectivity and long-term landscape connectivity. So that could find its way into the recommendations. It has not yet, though. It's a good idea.
So, so you weren't considering agricultural suitability?
No, we did do an agricultural suitability analysis. We didn't do a like biodiversity suitability analysis.
For crops, so for you understand, right?
Yeah.
Crops.
What else? Good.
Will these new rules and regulations make developers more responsible for some of the havoc they cause to the traffic and?
Gosh, I hope so.
I hope so too.
That's the idea, is to make new growth pay for itself better, to slow the pace of growth and development in the county generally, and to ensure that the growth that does come here is higher quality. That's the elevator speech version. Yeah, and there's some other things that we need to think about when we pursue those objectives. There's a decent likelihood that taking those actions are going to raise the cost of development in the county. And there are already people who live here who can't afford to live here because it's too expensive. And making it more so is going to be a burden on them. And the county, in some ways has a responsibility to help foster more, workforce housing or accommodate people who don't make six figures. So that comes with, these affirmative directions of better quality, slower pace, and better environmental protection that we have to. There's some other things that we have to do to take care of the community as a whole, and that will come with some price tags. Like everything. Well, it's 6:30. Please continue.
As you walk through the successive comprehensive plans that have been put together, you guys ever looked at what the population distribution has done over time? Age group percentages and that sort of thing? Are we looking at
Yeah, we do.
more seniors looking for stuff?
Yeah, we have some information on the population density and also age cohorts and stuff like that over there, and that's going to be part of kind of the population element that the county's working on. You all have been you've grown in every age cohort except for one, and that's 40 to 49-year-olds. So you need to plan for more seniors, more young people. For some reason, that 40 to 49, I don't know. That's the
Smartness league.
But yeah, we are looking at that sort of thing. Yeah.
So, on the website that I showed, this is up on the screen, there is a place to ask a question. If you still have questions, go there. And there's a couple places where you can, ask a question. You don't have to give your name. You don't have to give your email address. If you do, we'll answer your question. But you don't have to do that. So if you still have questions that linger, now, today, tomorrow, and going forward for the next 14 months, that's a place where you can ask and get an answer. So with that, I think Jake and I thank you. Appreciate you guys coming. Please do take some time to look at some of the work that's been done. There's a lot of detailed information here.